I'm Natasha Maidoff, and this is Artist Planet. This is my conversation with JoAnne McFarland, a visual artist and poet living and working in Brooklyn, and founder of Art Poetica. Her mission as an artist is to reflect on the brutal truth of what she sees around her, and to honor and celebrate the ability to thrive in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. She's committed to one creative act every day. So my first question is, it's the same question I ask everyone, and it's like, who are you and how do you survive? This is Artist Planet. So.
Ooh, okay. I love that question. It's big. It's a big question. Well, I'm someone who makes things. And I understood even when I was a little tiny girl that making things made me feel both relaxed and excited in a certain way that nothing else did. And I just really loved that feeling. It was a kind of disappearing into. And so I just loved then and still love that sense of absorption, of total absorption and of feeling transported out of your body, but more in your body at the same time. It's almost hard to describe. But I think a lot of creative people have that feeling and really love it and come to need it. And that is how I survive. I know that that feeling is more valuable to me than just about anything else. And so however I can achieve it, that's what I do. I do that every day.
And yes, you said that you do one creative act a day. What does that mean?
It means, well, my philosophy, my working philosophy is that violence and creativity are opposites. So I see creativity, I see violence as always, always, always in some manner seeking to preserve the status quo. And I think of creativity as the opposite of that. It's always using what we have now to create the future. So that's how I stay grounded in understanding that those two things are opposite, those two impulses, and they're both really strong. And so when I say I do something creative every day, I mean I do something to move myself and my life and the world as I understand it forward. It doesn't have to be a big thing, it could be a tiny thing. But I think of the world around us as so fundamentally violent and aggressive, intentionally built that way, that I do something to work against that every day. And I do that very, very intentionally and consciously as a way of keeping myself emotionally on balance. Yeah, I saw you wrote something about the fear state. Absolutely. And I think that that is all around us. I've always been aware of that, even as a little girl. And like what I said before about this feeling of disappearing into is so erotic. It is so wily and nourishing. And I've always been kind of tuned into that. And there, even as a little girl, I was always so unsettled by the fact that that feeling that I'm describing is so threatening culturally. I've never really understood why, but I think that my work comes out of trying to always pick that apart and understand it, because to me it seems so beautiful and life affirming. But I am aware all of these years later that that state is a threat in this culture. So creativity is a threat in this culture. Exactly. Creativity, real creativity, which means living in a space of not being sure, of not having the answer, of being able to kind of think on your feet and be curious, and to just invite other people to be curious too, to not shut yourself or other people down just because they say something you don't like, or something happens that you don't immediately understand. of kind of just really living in a space of being, of questing. So that's kind of like where I spend my time, but it's a place that feels very uncomfortable to a lot of people. And that discomfort, I believe, is learned.
Well, maybe why don't we talk about what your earliest memory is when you felt this and said, yes, I want to be an artist.
Well, I didn't decide to be an artist until after I got out of college. But all along, I could understand from my earliest days in school that this feeling that I'm describing and this place was not valued, that it was kind of like on the side of everything else, like math or science, which I also love, by the way. But all of those things got more time. So whenever the teacher would say that we were going to make something, I mean, I can still put myself in that school, in that chair, thinking, oh my God, we're going to make something. I'm just so excited. We're going to sew something. I remember things that we made because I just loved doing that so much, but it was always the last thing. And as I grew older and went to Hunter College High School, which I loved, but there also, the arts were always secondary. And I learned that in college as well. No one goes to Princeton and then decides that they're going to be an artist. You're going to be a banker. You're going to make some money. You're looking for some status. But that wasn't what made me feel excited. And I can also really, really easily tune into this feeling in other people. That's how I decided to, first of all, I was the exhibitions director at AIR Gallery, but also when I decided that I was going to use my own live work space as an exhibition space, it was because of that, because I really understand this feeling in other people so easily. I've never met anybody who doesn't have this feeling. It's part of being human, but we learn to kind of bury it or push it to the side, or it's the thing I'm going to do after I do the rest. But that leaves a lot of people feeling very hungry.
Another thing that I responded to in your work is, I mean, your writing is so powerful. I mean, you're a poet, and you say at one point that words are the most powerful. Is that what you say?
That words are the most powerful things in human societies. Yeah. Well, I'm sure that that's true. You know, it's like we think that nuclear power is strong. It's pretty strong, but it's not as strong as words. And the reason why I know that that's true is that I always tell people, you know, if I left my studio and stood on the corner here and stopped every person I know and said, has anyone ever said anything to you that has changed the course of your life in a positive way or a negative way? I bet you every single person would say yes. And often people will say things and they're just tossing it off. The teacher might say something. I'm a poet because of something that a teacher just tossed off. He just said something casually in a class one day, and it was like, oh my God, I had never thought of that. And that sentence that lasted 20 seconds changed the course of my entire life. And so I think, yes, words are that powerful.
I just got the chills. What was the phrase that your professor or teacher said?
I just always loved French. This was a French seminar, and we had been asked to translate a poem, and each student had been given part of this poem. And we had to read our part out loud. And after I read my part, he said, well, you would have to be a poet to translate your part that way. Mm. You would have to be a poet yourself. And I thought, oh, I had never even thought of that. But that was a gift to me. And so I do think that we have to be really, really careful about the words we use and how we say things.
So he gave you permission.
He allowed me to think of myself in a different way. in a way that was expansive. And he wasn't, it was a gift.
And
But
so
I think most of us have things like that that have happened to us. Or someone, often we know that someone can say something about how they see you that's very negative, that shuts you down year after year after year, or you carry year after year after year. And it's a shame. But if you start to really think of language as, these abstract, beautiful patterns, actually, just like the things we make that we call visual art. I mean, letters are really only black marks that are themselves a design. We talk about all of these things as different, and that's also learned. People used to ask me, well, are you more a poet or a visual artist? Or what comes first? Or what matters more? Or however they would talk about a distinction. And it was like, oh, wait, there is no distinction. There's no distinction between my poetry and my art, between my body and my space. I can make my entire space, whether I'm in it or whether I'm moving through the world, I can make that the whole art. So I don't separate them anymore. That's something that we learn to do. Now, why do we do that? That's not something we have to do. So then if you start to ask yourself, well, what's the advantage of that? What do we get from putting ourselves or these things? In fact, it's really interesting because I think the word artist has so many things connected to it that are not the way I want to live my life.
what things are those?
Often the word artist is used as a kind of exclusive thing. Or let me change that. It can be used that way. Artists are these people who do these things. Like, how are we going to keep the artists in the neighborhood if you're talking about gentrification?
Right.
So when you talk about the artist, you're talking about, most people are understanding certain characteristics connected to those people.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think of creativity as a birthright, as part of being human, then that can change things. I'm not even saying, I'm interested in necessarily changing in them in a specific direction. I'm just saying, okay, well, it's good to examine why we have these things.
Mm.
And because words are so powerful, why is artist these things and not those other things? What do we get from that? And what do I get that helps me in my life or doesn't?
So do you think everyone is an artist then?
Oh, I think that everyone is creative.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think everyone can have some of the things that we generally attach to the word artist. Everyone can make things. I've never met somebody who isn't interested in that. Just like everyone can destroy things.
Right. So you don't like the exclusivity of the term artist, I think. So.
It's not useful for where I want to go. I think we have all words as bridges. So, if I just describe myself as a poet, an artist, and a curator, I do want people to understand that I'm probably doing this group of things. But then once, we're having a conversation, a deeper conversation, we can take that apart and see, okay, well, what do we mean by that? And I think language in particular works this way. I had a whole series of paintings that part of a series called Use in a Sentence. Hmm. And I came up with the series because when I was a kid, the teacher would always say, use this word in a sentence. whatever the word was, in order to make sure that you knew what the word meant. And I thought, oh, well, isn't that really interesting? Because if I say the word beat, there's B-E-A-T and there's B-E-E-T. So I would make a painting of beats. And then I had a phrase at the top that said, bound and beaten, woman still lives to tell all. Mm-hmm. And unless you walked up to the painting, you would not see that it said that. You would think, oh, that's a painting of some beats. And from a distance, all the way over there, I would know visually, oh, those are some beats. But once you get up to it and read it, well, now it means something else. And all of those words have to be designed in my mind in a way that you might see very differently. We would both agree that that's a painting of some beats. That's almost not even interesting. It's so obvious. But how we construct language, a sentence, and what that means is something that's very private, actually, and happens consecutively in our own imaginations. And we might not be seeing the same thing at all.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And I'd like to now segue to your paintings, which is that, like, I noticed that you start out being more of an abstract. Well, you mentioned that you start out abstract, and then those paintings don't exist anymore. And then you moved into representational, more figurative work, but still seems to have a very political message that's more abstract, I think. Yes.
Well, I still make abstract work every now and then. It's what I said in the beginning, that I make things. I love making things. I'll make anything. It's the making that's really fun for me. And so I understand all of these ways of, okay, well, I'm just going to combine. Now, the reason why I went back to representational work was because my original question when I was a little girl, when I was 6 or 7, and my parents gave me my first easel and oil paint set, was, well, how do the masters make those paintings look like that? I am still just dumbfounded when I see, those clouds and those figures, and it's like, how do you take these blobs of color and end up with that? That's really magic. You're believing in something. It's not just the tools, it's the tools and something. But I wanted to really unlock that. And I figured, this was in 2003 or something like that I really had not answered my original question as a girl. I hadn't answered it. I hadn't taken the time to really take that apart. And was I going to ever do it? And that's when I returned to doing representational work, which was interesting because I had already built a career on abstract work, particularly abstract prints. So I had noticed at Open Studios that even though my first attempts at representational work were pretty clumsy, that people were looking. There was an energy in the paintings that was different, or that slowed people down a little bit. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to work at this, even though it's so hard. It was so hard. That's when I started to do just one creative thing a day. I said, it doesn't matter. I can do one stroke on this, but I have to come to the studio and I have to do something. And then it was just, just put one foot in front of the other, just slowly use what I had been taught by this great, great painting teacher, Andrew Reese, a local painter in Brooklyn who I think still gives classes out of his home, oil painting. And I just used everything that he taught me, which was a lot. and just very, very, very slowly and methodically, day by day, built my representational practice. And I'm really glad that I did. But I'll tell you, in the beginning, a lot of my colleagues were saying, you can't do this, JoAnne. You can't make a turn like this. People will laugh. It's so amateurish. It just doesn't work. You're going to embarrass yourself. And I was like, wow, okay, that may be true, but I'm not scared.
Good for you. Yeah.
So that's how that happened.
Yeah. I mean, I think that people assume, first of all, when you're an artist, that stepping into the studio is like something you're running there. But actually, I thought that was interesting, that thing how you're like, you force yourself to just do that one thing to get you going and to take on a challenge, which not necessarily, I mean, it's about your own journey, not about what someone else thinks you should be doing. I mean, you had that question in your mind, the curiosity to try to create representational work.
Well, I think it all goes back to that feeling that I'm describing. I really think that being creative is the most erotic space there is. So the question then is, well, how alive are you? How does fear interfere with our being alive? In the last couple of years, I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to live every day at 100%. I'm going to just do that. I'm not going to have casual interactions or ask people stupid questions or pretend to be in places where I really don't want to be, or I'm not going to do that. I don't have any time to waste. I'm going to go at everything 100%. What could that feel like? That feels really good. It feels great. But I think, again, that we learn in order to stay connected to each other sometimes, or we think that we need to kind of lop off some of our wattage or lop off pieces of our personality. So I don't do that. I don't do that anymore.
I admire that. You know, it's hard to have that discipline, I think, and clarity to know.
And I think it does, actually, I think that's exactly the right word. It does come from discipline. And I do tell people all the time, well, first of all, I created a space that's the safest place on earth. It really is. So I can be totally myself here. And I'm by myself. I think that's actually the biggest hurdle of everything I've done. The biggest hurdle for me was accepting that I could actually live so much of my life by myself, alone. You know, I was married for 30 years. I have 2 children I adore. I have lots of friends, but I spend hours and hours and hours most days by myself. And that's really hard for a lot of people to accept. But for me, once I accepted that, it made a lot of my fears disappear. And that's made a really big difference for me.
One question that people are very curious about is, how does one survive as an artist? Like, have you been able to support, this might be a personal question, but have you been able to support yourself in the arts by making art or working in the arts, or how have you done that?
Well, like I said, I was married for 30 years. And fortunately, the person that I was married to, he was a computer programmer, and he was a computer programmer at the beginning of computer programming. So he barely had to get dressed in order to be hired. I mean, they were so hungry for people who could do that work that it was very easy for him to be employed, to be gainfully employed, for our family to survive. And so I was really, really fortunate in that regard. So I always have done my artwork. He was very supportive of my creative life. So that was a real gift. And so I think that financially, a lot of the buffer for our family came from him. There was one year, 1992, and notice that I remember the year when I sold 60 pieces.
Wow.
I sold 60 pieces of art, and the average price was $200, which is not tiny. It was great. I sold work to corporations, to individuals. It was wonderful. And I made like $11,000, maybe $12,000. And I actually had to sit with that for a couple of days to think that I had made and sold 60 pieces, and that was all I made. And that was at the point when I said, I'm never gonna make money at this. If I can sell 60 pieces and not make money, and that was an unusual year. I sold to corporations, it was unreal. So that was the point where it was like, oh, wow. I mean, seriously, that was a moment of truth where, okay, how invested are you emotionally in this? Because you're never gonna make money at it. You better figure out some other thing that it gives you that you really need. And I did. And that went back to, again, when I was a kid. That's been my anchor. The earliest picture of me is when I was 3. And I have this expression on my face of being totally absorbed by what's in front of me. And if you look in the picture, it looks like it's just like a mess of nothing. But I am just so happy. And that's my anchor. I know that person. I know that soul. I know why she's so transported. And so, yeah, that's where I want to live. And I have given up a lot to stay in that space. So now, like I said, everything in my space is absolutely rigidly intentional. There's nothing extra, no extra food in my refrigerator. I shop to eat only. I buy, I eat. There are no extra clothes, there's nothing extra. There's only what I need. My advice is for people who want to survive as creative people is you pare everything down to only what you absolutely either must have or that gives you a tremendous amount of pleasure. That's all I've got. And I love it. But I do that every day. That's a practice. There's no mail. When I get my mail, I stand outside at the garbage and get rid of the mail there. It doesn't come into my space. So, it's it's a really rigid, almost ascetic philosophy. And the reason why it is that way is that I feel I'm always working against the messages that, again, I take as extraordinarily destructive and hostile, that I don't have what I need, that I need more, that I need better, that I can't trust people, that I can't look anybody at all in the eye. Sure I can. I absolutely can. So all of those messages that we get, my practice is working against those. As far as I'm concerned, I'm a revolutionary. I think the most revolutionary thing you can be in America is satisfied. The idea that you can be satisfied, that you can actually, satisfaction allows you to relax. And those aren't the messages that we get.
Yeah. And I would like to talk also about, have you touch base on about your work, like you talk about being Black and female, and then in your paintings, you're really talking about that.
The reason why Blackness is so important in my work is that Blackness means creativity. It means it's a magnetic force. And the Black doll is magnetic in that way. I've had people stand and look at that. It's like, yeah, I don't know what's going on there, but it's very arresting and kind of off-putting. But some of the most interesting things that happen in our lives are like that. But again, we don't want to stay, we tend not to want to stay in that space, but that space is very, very rich. And so, yes, Blackness in my work is a psychological marker, and as is femaleness. I'm really very, very intrigued by how women are constantly attacked. As soon as women have language, and again, and this goes back to the power of words, women are taught, or girls are taught from as soon as they have language, that they are not safe. That they need to, the only way they can be safe is from some internal protection. Their families, their mothers, their fathers, their teachers, something from outside will protect them. And that there's something about them that's wild and needs to be controlled. And when they become teenagers, then that explosive sexuality is almost like, well, this is the most powerful thing on earth. It is absolutely the future. And it's like, women know that, or girls know that, they're reminded of it, they feel it. It's so frightening. It's so frightening. It is so frightening. I will never forget that. But it's like, okay, well, what am I going to do with this power? And many women are so frightened by it that they allow these external forces to mediate their experience. They buy into, okay, well, can I do this? Can I test this? Can I touch him? Can I touch her? Can I? Can I? And a lot of women never have to answer that because they're so magnetic themselves. But one of the reasons why I wrote my collection, Identifying the Body, that collection in particular, was because the opening poem takes the reader, I hope, it certainly takes me, past where Me Too got to, which is, okay, Me Too is still living in a space where, primarily, where, you know, men will do bad things. You know, look what that bad man did. Or look what this bad sexual situation that happened to me. As a woman in my own life, I had to get to a point where, no, my life is way bigger than that. I have to confront my desire to touch, my desire to lust, to want something maybe I shouldn't. What happens if I try to touch this person and they don't like it? What am I risking? What do I, as a woman, somebody who's used to being the magnet, what do I do when I have to confront these forces within myself that are greedy and just voracious? I think that then you really got something. And so a lot of my writing, my poetry in particular, even more than my visual art, okay, so I would say this really is a distinction, is about how do we integrate all of the pieces of our natures so that we have the biggest lives we can have. And as a woman, for me, that has meant confronting my own voracious desire nature without shame. Where can I put that? Where can I put that passion that is healthy for me and for the people that I love?
It says it all in that poem. It's the loose horse in the valley, right?
Yes. Yes, because that poem is saying, well, no one gets to tell me. No one gets to tell, and that is, I absolutely live my life in that place. No one tells me what to do. No. Now, I don't hurt people. Okay. I am extraordinarily nonviolent, so I don't hurt people. But I have so many checks on myself in order to live as positively as possible that I'm going 100% as creative as I can. And I will not be stopped.
Fantastic. What advice would you give to other artists or creative people who want to generate work, I guess?
Well, this is interesting that you phrase it that way, because I would love to talk about the idea of generating work, because again, I'm a curator. And so, I've had this wonderful opportunity to curate a show at 440 Gallery, their small work show, and to give a talk about, my process. Well, how did I pick these pieces? And I said to the audience, I said, okay, well, believe it or not, I'm not actually looking at the pieces. I'm looking at the energy. I'm looking and maybe it's my experience as having made so many different kinds of work. I can look at any kind of work, anything at all, anything. It doesn't matter who's made it, whether it's right, it doesn't matter, because that's not what I'm looking at. I'm looking at, is it full of passion? All of the things that we make are just artifacts of our internal states. That's all they are. That's all. And I think that most artists would be fascinated to really think about how much is revealed by the things that they make. So I would say that if you want to create these manifestations of your internal world, the best thing to do is to slow down as much as you can, to think really deeply about what you do day to day, to make your life as orderly and organized as you can, so that you have as much time to think and to kind of just meander, to be wild, to be curious, and to be really, really gentle with yourself. Really, really gentle. Do one small thing. If you do one small thing every day, that's 365 things. That's going to add up to something. So if you want to externalize your experience, either through writing or sculpture or cooking or whatever it is you're making, you just do a little bit whenever you can. Everybody doesn't have the luxury of doing it every day. But it's definitely a practice. It's not something that just happens. And I honestly really think that it helps to not think of the things themselves, the objects that we produce, to not judge them so much, because they're really only artifacts of where you are right now. The way I decide if I'm ready to have a show or produce a book is I look at whatever it is and I say, for me only, is this the best I can do right now? I'm not measuring it against anybody else. I'm only saying, is this the best? And you know whether you're lying to yourself. But if this is the best I can do right now, then it's ready. And you need that feedback, because creativity is a circle. Unless you can share, and again, we think of sex as this exchange, but I'm talking about an erotic life. In an erotic life, you need the exchange. It's a circle. You need to be able to offer something and get something back. And we get really, really, really sad when we don't get anything back. And that's why it's important that our evidence, whatever it is we're showing of our internal states, that we find ways to share that with other people, whether it's through exhibitions or publishing a book or putting something online, or however you do it, little ways or big ways. Because it's a circle, it really has to happen if you're going to grow.
And my last question is really like, do you ever see yourself stopping making work? Like, do you think there is an end in sight, or is this something you're going to do until the day you die? Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting that you ask that, because I think where I am is that I really think of the entire space and as my entire life now as the creation. Yeah, I feel like I'm living it and walking through it every day now. I don't have the same hunger to make the painting or make the poem anymore. I don't, because I think my worldview has expanded more than that. That the conversations that I've had, like the conversation we're having today, or the conversations that I've had in my space, are absolutely invaluable. I think that they have a life and an energy now that I didn't predict. It wasn't where my focus was 10, 15 years ago. But I think that what happened with my tenure at AIR Gallery, when I was the exhibitions director, is that I really fell in love with working with other people and of understanding how that soft place in so many of my colleagues, where they really want to risk more or really want to try something, and being able to kind of join with them and create something bigger than what they envisioned. And so I'm in the process now of planning 2 or 3 shows for the fall. I have a collaborator, Sasha Chachavatsi, who I work with, and I love working with her. Our energy is so different, so complementary. And again, it kind of expands what I can do on my own. And I just really enjoy that so much. So I think a lot has happened that I didn't predict, that I didn't expect. I didn't plan this. I didn't plan this. So I think I'm just curious to see, as I'm less and less attached to particular kinds of evidence, well, let's see what happens. So I think I'm just waiting to see, but I will always be making something, or that's just what my energy is. That's just where I live. So no, I don't expect that to stop until I really just can't anymore.
That was my conversation with JoAnne McFarland that we recorded in May of 2021. This episode was produced by me, Natasha Maidoff, and was edited by Carlos Bergs.